I'm going to talk with you about the gut-brain connection, because a healthy gut and a healthy microbiome is really important for your mental health. So I've written this book about the bacteria and the brain. It's not translated in English yet. I hope that will be the case later. But I'd like to start with a journey back in time. And we're going to go quite far back in time, no less than 4 billion years back. So a long way back in evolution, many billions of years before even the dinosaurs occurred on Earth. And at that time, there was no oxygen on the planet. So there were no plants, no trees, no animals, and of course no humans. But there was water, and therefore there was life. And life on Earth for many billions of years consisted solely of bacteria. Several types of bacteria that live together and also work together. And it's best to view a bacteria as a small chemical factory that typically is very good in metabolizing one component, let's say component A, into component B. Then another bacteria is very good at metabolizing component B to component C. So these bacteria often need each other, and with their diversity in which substances they can produce, they actually make Earth habitable, because they make sure that many organic new substances come into existence. And they inhabited, for example, the deep sea, where they made these black smokers that also currently are still on the bottom of the deep sea. Or these plaques alongside of lakes where many bacteria live together. Finally, the beginning of multicellular life with yeasts, with fungi, much later plants, animals, mammals, and also humans. And with the humans inhabiting this world, we have changed it quite a lot. And it now looks as if it has been a human planet all along, but it has not. This planet has always been inhabited with bacteria, and whatever other life has developed on this planet has always evolved together with bacteria. And also for humans, we are not only used to bacteria around us, they are actually essential for our existence. So also in 2024, our bodies are still full of bacteria and other microorganisms, and we call that our microbiome, all microorganisms in and around our body. We have some of them on our skin, we have some of them in our mouth, in nose, ears, quite some on our sexual organs, a few even in our lungs, but the great majority of the microbiome resides in our guts. And there we have many thousands different types of bacteria, also viruses, yeasts, and occasional parasites, and also fungi. This microbiome is very important for our health, and it's also very important for the human development. But when the fetus is still in the womb, it is not really sterile, but it is relatively void of bacteria. So from birth onwards, the baby has to develop a microbiome virtually from scratch. But luckily, the vagina of the mother is full of bifido and lactobacteria, and these are exactly the bacteria that the child will need in its very first months to develop adequate immune responses and also to digest its first milk. when the child is born, it is really pressed through the mother's vagina and in that way really massaged in with all these healthy bacteria that are really kickstarting its microbiome. In the UMC Groningen, where I work, there was a lot of research going on with rodents, especially mice, and these mice are raised under sterile conditions. They are born with cesarean sections, they are fed with sterile food, drink only sterile water, and also their cages are void of bacteria. And when studying these sterile mice, several behavioral and brain disturbances come to mind. For example, their brains do not fully develop. Also, their behavior is a little bit odd, with occasional fearful periods, but also lack of fear in anxious situations. These mice are less sociable and have more difficulty connecting with other mice. Also, they are more impulsive. They have difficulty in inhibiting their behavior. Now, as a psychiatrist, these types of behavior deviations sound a little bit like neurodiversity, what we see a lot among human people as well. And of course, we don't do this type of experiments with humans, but in naturally occurring situations, there are babies that, for example, are born with cesarean section and that did not have the opportunity to be fed with mother's milk and, for example, are treated in their early weeks with antibiotics. And these three factors are all disadvantages to a developing microbiome. So if children have had several of these conditions, we see higher prevalence of allergies, also asthma, immune disorders. We also see more obesity at adult age, more diabetes, and in the realm of psychiatry, we more often see neurodiversity, in particular autism and ADHD. Now, not only at an early age is it very important to have adequate development of the microbiome, also at adult age, it's still important to have a healthy and diverse microbiome. The benefits of a good microbiome, they help you to digest all your food. Like I said, each bacteria is a small chemical factory, and the more chemical factories you have, the more food components you can digest. Also, the gut wall is really thin. It consists of only one cell layer, and a microbiome can form a kind of biofilm at the inner part of your gut that can improve the barrier function so that toxic substances are not absorbed into the bloodstream. Also, the immune system is well trained by a diverse microbiome. The immune system is often trained in the gut. Many immune cells reside in the gut to be trained there with all kinds of substances from the outer world. Parts can be food, parts can be ingested other fragments, but a lot are also the microorganisms that dwell in your gut. Finally, healthy microbiome, they produce specific substances. We call them short-chain fatty acids. Most famous of them is butyrate. They can diffuse into the blood and through the bloodstream reach various organs, and they have health benefits in multiple organs, including the brain. So if you take good care of your microbiome will take good care of you. In the north of the Netherlands, a lot of investigation is going on into the microbiome, especially from the genetics and gastrointestinal departments. the Lifeline study, which is a very large cohort including 160,000 citizens in the northern provinces, has also investigated the microbiome. And there were several connections between the inhabitants of our guts, so the bacteria that we can find in fecal samples, and the occurrence of psychiatric and neurological diseases. Now, it may not be that strange that there is a connection between the gut microbiome and diseases of the brain, because these bacteria play a very important role also for the brain. For example, the gut bacteria metabolize several amino acids, for example tryptophan, into substances that are used as neurotransmitters like serotonin. And serotonin plays an important role as a neurotransmitter in the brain, where it's connected to mood, but also in the nervous system of the gut, where it has an important function in gut motility. Glutamate, another amino acid that is an active neurotransmitter in itself, is converted into GABA by gut bacteria, and GABA is an important inhibiting neurotransmitter that can make you more calm and that can help with sleep. Phenylalanine, also an amino acid from food that dwells in your gut, is converted by gut bacteria to tyrosine, which is a precursor of dopamine, very important neurotransmitter for the brain. There's also a connection between the gut microbiome and your brain through stress. We all encounter stress every now and then, even if we try to avoid it. Now, stress is detected by the brain, and in response to stress, several hormones are released, including cortisol. Cortisol activates the immune system. And as I said, many immune cells dwell in our guts. And there are a specific type of immune cells called the gamma delta T cells. And animal research has shown that under the influence of cortisol, these gamma delta T cells start to multiply. And they then also migrate from the gut through the blood to various organs, including close to the brains. When these gamma delta T cells are active close to the brain, they can produce pro-inflammatory factors, and these pro-inflammatory factors can induce sickness behavior. For example, anhedonia, lack of motivation, apathy, and also fatigue. Symptoms that we typically see in people with burnout. Now, in rodent research, it was found that a specific type of lactobacillus could prevent the multiplication of these gamma delta T cells, which led to much less apathy and other symptoms of sickness behavior. A similar research has also been performed in students, actually in Japanese medical students, and they were treated either with probiotics containing this lactoacid bacilla or with placebo. And when these students went through an examination period, which was really stressful and lasted several weeks, those treated with probiotics experienced fewer symptoms of stress. For example, they slept better, they had fewer somatic complaints, and they also felt more relaxed. So there is some evidence suggesting that especially lactobacillus can prevent the somatic response to stress. Now, we have lived together for as long as we live with bacteria, and we have used bacteria to prepare our food for many thousands of years. But over the last 80 years, this long co-evolution seems to have ended with the use of pesticides that have largely reduced the number of healthy bacteria on our vegetables, on our fruits, and also in the food of animals. And also the soil contains much fewer bacteria than it used to do. The use of antibiotics, and in the Netherlands, doctors are relatively modest in prescribing antipsychotics. They are really educated to use them as little as possible. But this is not the case in cattle raising, and our cattle is held so close together under poor hygienic circumstances that they need to be treated with antibiotics to prevent diseases. Also, the refrigerator, it looks so innocent, but actually we used to prepare much of our food for winter months, vegetables, but also meat and milk, using bacteria by fermentation. And now that we can simply keep it in a refrigerator, we don't ferment as much of our food anymore. So the more frequent prevalence of several brain disorders over the last 80 years may be connected to the end of this long co-evolution that we had with bacteria that reside in our gut. Nutrition is very important to feed our gut bacteria, and healthy food that also provides food for our gut bacteria consists of several different types of vegetables, a lot of fruit, and whole grain products. There are also some products that we should not use that much, which is especially ultra-processed food that contains many additives, for example, additives to keep the food free of bacteria. And of course, it kills the bacteria in the food, but it will also kill the bacteria in your gut. Also, alcohol is not healthy for your gut microbiome, as alcohol is used in the hospital to sterilize the skin. If you drink a lot of alcohol, the alcohol can kill the gut microbiome. Fast foods, for example, a hamburger, contains very little nutritional fibers, and nutritional fibers are exactly the components that gut bacteria live off. So if you eat a lot of fast food, they will be starving to death, and they cannot make beneficiary components that will keep your body healthy. It helps to eat some extra fermented nutrition, for example, yogurt, kimchi, sauerkraut, kefir. If we look at depression, it is obvious that many people with depression also suffer from gut and stomach problems, and stomach ache is very common among people with depression. It's also the other way around. People with severe gut disorders more frequently have depression. And we know that when we provide a stool sample from people with depression to these sterile mice, and they develop their microbiome in concordance to that of a person with depression, they will also develop depression-like symptoms. So obviously something in the stool is related to depression. And we do see subtle differences in the microbiome of people with depression. It's not a huge change, but it's quite subtle. So far, there have been approximately 25 studies that assessed the influence of probiotics for people with depression. And if you take them all together, you average them, then there does seem to be a small but significant effect. That doesn't mean that every probiotic study was positive. What I think is very promising, but we don't know yet, is stool transplantation, so a fecal sample of a healthy donor to be given to a person with depression. And there's a large investigation currently running in Australia, and I'm really looking forward to see the results in 1 year from now. Let's go to another brain disorder, Parkinson's disease. We know that at least in part of the people with Parkinson's disease, the problems actually start in the gut, with an affection of the nervous system of the gut. And we think that probably the disease mechanisms actually uses the vagal nerve, which connects the brain to various organs, to ascend from the gut into the brain, and there then spreads to the brain. There are also some studies suggesting that healthy microbiome may be a protection against Parkinson's disease, and certainly an unhealthy gut microbiome, as we see, for example, caused by pollution with substances like glyphosate, that can easily affect the microbiome and make people more vulnerable for Parkinson's disease. The last brain disease that I'd like to discuss with you is Alzheimer's disease. And we know that in the brain of people with Alzheimer's, there is an aggregation of a specific protein which is called beta amyloid. And beta amyloid is secreted by the neurons, which is actually a general response to intruders in the brain. There's, for example, some case studies of Salmonella bacteria that can also enter the human brain, and in response to these bacteria, brain cells produce and secrete a lot of beta amyloid, and this is toxic to Salmonella bacteria. So it is effective to a bacterial infection, but it's also toxic to the brain cells itself. And we know that people with Alzheimer's disease more frequently had periodontitis. And I used to think that, yes, of course, if you're a little bit forgetful, you'll probably forget to brush your teeth. And that's why you'll probably have more periodontitis, but it's probably the other way around. So bacteria that are causing periodontitis have also been found in the brain after death in people with Alzheimer's disease. So if we can have a healthy microbiome, not only in the gut, but also in the mouse, this may be a protection for Alzheimer's disease. The last topic that I want to discuss with you in this workshop is aging. With aging, we see something that's called inflammaging, which is aging of the inflammatory system. With inflammaging, the response to specific pathogens is reduced. We saw that, for example, in COVID pandemics, where elderly were specifically vulnerable, but the general response is increased. So there's a general pro-inflammatory status of the body, which is disadvantageous to many organs, and that can cause damage to many organs, including the brain. There's also a process which is called microbe aging. The microbiome is becoming older, and there's a reduced diversity, especially genera like lactobacillus and bifidobacteria become more rare in an aging person. Interesting, what we see in healthy elderly that are also cognitively sharp as a needle is that they do still have higher amounts of bifidobacteria. This was the bacteria that used to be so important for the newborn to develop a healthy microbiome. And it's very interesting to think about what stool transplantation could do in the process of aging. There has been some research using probiotics which did not show that great result. But with a stool transplantation, you can actually transport not just one or two bacterial species, but the complete collaboration of microorganisms from one person to another. This could definitely be something really interesting for the future. So we come at the end of our masterclass and also at the end of life, and after an aging process. We all die, after which the microbiome will provide us with the last services and turn our body into fertile earth. Thank you very much for your attention. I saw many responses on the chat coming in, and I'm very looking forward for your questions, and together with Roos, I'm going to take some time to answer them all.
Well, thank you, Iris, for this inspiring talk. I also saw some nice questions coming in and discussions in the chat, so we're going to take the time to answer them now and see if we can dive even deeper on this topic. So we're going to start with a question from Paula. And Paula asks, how can we assess if our microbiome is good enough?
That's an interesting question, but also a tough one. Because actually, we do measure the microbiome a lot in UMC Groningen, but we don't really know how the perfect microbiome looks like. We do know that it's different per person. For example, there are associations between which blood group you have and which microbiome people tend to have. So probably this differs per person. And we don't yet know how the optimal microbiome looks like. A very easy rule of thumb is that you can look at your stool and especially at the form of it, right? Yes. So it shouldn't be too thin and it also shouldn't be too hard. If the consistency of stool is right in between, that is a general sign of a healthy microbiome.
Nice. I think that's a good answer to look at. And for the people who want to look this up, you can assess it with the Bristol stool chart.
Exactly, that's the one.
So yeah, you can do that at home to check if everything is all right.
Yes, Voedingscentrum has it as well.
Then the second question from Fran. Would you recommend the intake of probiotics? And if so, which ones or what types?
That's a good question. Well, personally, I find it more interesting to look at healthy nutrition because many bacteria are also naturally occurring in food, and food can give you so much more than probiotics because it also contains healthy elements that your brain and other organs are built on. But if you are interested in probiotics, there is some evidence that it may help under specific situations to improve your microbiome. And then I would choose for a probiotic combination that uses many different strains. So there are options, for example, that contain 9 different bacterial strains, and I would go for them.
Yeah, and it's usually a bit of trial and error, right? Because you don't know exactly which strains you would need. So to see
yes,
if
and
it,
not all
helps.
bacterial strains are allowed for human digestion.
Exactly.
So you will usually have several types of Bifido and Lactobacillus.
Yeah. Then the third question is it's a bit similar to the first question, but this was specifically asked by Joanna if there is any test that you can do to check if you have a healthy gut microbiome.
They are offered commercially, but as I said, science has not yet come up with the optimal microbiome. So you may want to do this test and it will be relatively costly. But it's difficult to base a nutritional recommendation on those findings. So I would personally not do those tests, especially also because they're very costly. And I would use the amount rather to go for biological groceries, for example, where there really is some evidence for improving your microbiome compared to regular supermarkets. So
so first focus on a varied diet of high quality,
right,
and then maybe look further if you if you can't figure it out. Okay, then question 4 by Macy. Do babies who are born through C-section have a less healthy microbiome, less healthy bacteria?
On average, yes, but if babies born with cesarean section are then breastfed, they usually catch up well for their lack of microbiome development. But there is some retardation in the development of the microbiome after C-section. Okay. There's now a lot of research going on where mothers with planned cesarean sections, they use a swab, a vaginal swab that can be given to the babies. Mm-hmm. This research has shown promising effects, but there are also some negative studies. So for now, it's too early to say, yes, this is the way to go, but that could become a new habit for planned cesarean section, but it's not yet solid evidence.
Okay, thank you. Then question number 5 by, I hope I pronounced it right, Yogesh. You mentioned about the bacteria in the mouth, which was found in the brain as well. So what are some action points for improving mouth bacteria? Should I brush more often, 3 to 4 times a day, or lesser, like once or twice a day?
Oh, that's a very good question.
Yeah, I like this question.
This is knowledge that I know from my colleagues at the dentist. They do not recommend more often brushing than twice a day, unless there are signs of periodontitis. So periodontitis is very common. It's not always painful, and many people just leave it that way. But I think this would be a good argument to really treat periodontitis as effectively as possible. Also, the microbiome from the oral cavity is related to what you eat, drink, and to smoking. So quitting smoking is very important for a healthy oral microbiome. Not too much alcohol is important, and I would say normal dental hygiene, but there's no evidence, at least as far as I know, for increased dental hygiene.
Yeah, so we can stick to the 2 times a day.
I think so, yes.
Then we have Tanu. How do we increase the microbiome? And we have gone through what is affected and wait, I have to read this question before I'm gonna. Oh yeah, so we have gone through what affects the microbiome and what is increasing the microbiome, but she missed a bit on how to do this.
How to do this?
Yeah, practically.
Yes,
I think.
Yes, practically. Increased intake of vegetables, and I would say between 400 and 600 grams a day, which is a lot, like a pile on your plate. And I would say use that on at least 2 meals, because otherwise you really have to eat a whole lot. Different fruits all contain many different nutritional fibers. Onions contain a lot of fibers, whole grain products, and also leave out unhealthy stuff. Prepared foods, especially ultra-processed foods containing meats. And you can add specifically fermented products.
Yeah. So a diverse diet with fruits, vegetables.
Right.
And I think it usually sounds a lot, 400, 500 grams. But what I do as a nutritionist, at least, is to advise people to really try to incorporate it in every meal, almost. Maybe even at your breakfast. Try to be creative.
Yeah, why not?
There are enough recipes online to do that. I see oats with carrots, like sort of a carrot cake, but then healthy. So you can be creative, and then it will become easier over time to increase that.
That's right.
Then we go to Nicole, 8th question already. how can I ensure that I get all necessary nutrients to have a good microbiome if I do have intolerances and allergies such as lactose intolerance or irritable bowel syndrome?
Yes, this is really a case for a dietitian. So there are very skilled dietitians that can help you on a specific circumstances. So my advice is we're more to a general adult audience, but if you have specific intolerance that needs a specific dietary advice, and I think for now I don't have enough information to give it right here, so I would really recommend a dietitian consult.
Yeah, I agree with that. So I think that's good advice. Then we have Tracy. What is the difference between prebiotics and probiotics?
Good question. Probiotics are live bacteria that we think also reach the gut alive and that can multiply there and have beneficiary effects. Prebiotics are used to feed these bacteria. So prebiotics usually consist of nutritional fibers. So you can apply prebiotics very easily with healthy food. And there are some food additives that, for example, contain a combination of pre and probiotics. But also the probiotics can be in food, especially in biological yogurts.
Nice. So we can just do that by eating well enough.
I think so. I think it would be, well, that's my personal recommendation, that if you use healthy food instead of many nutritional supplements, you will treat your body as a whole. It will not only benefit your microbiome, but also the components that your body is built of.
Yeah, and in some cases, specific probiotics can be helpful, but in general, you want to work preventative, right? With having a nice and varied diet full of prebiotics. Then Katie, I think we've already answered this one. So which functional testing would you suggest to understand your microbiome? So that's still,
I wouldn't
researched, and we're not quite sure, right?
I think it's too early to already use tests of the microbiome, unless there are specific and severe complaints. But then I would do that together with a stomach gut specialist. So I wouldn't go on my own to commercial companies. There can be relatively high prices, and it's difficult to really interpret the findings.
Yeah, and first of all, you always focus on the lifestyle factors first, and then you go into testing if nothing comes out of that. Then Eva asks if it's true that taking probiotics and or prebiotics when you have taken antibiotics will help prevent killing good bacteria in your gut and help recover faster.
So it depends on which antibiotics you take. They're broad spectrum and smaller spectrum antibiotics, and also how many of them will affect the gut microbiome. It is true that broad-spectrum antibiotics is disadvantageous for your microbiome, and currently the hospital policy differs per center. Some of them do recommend probiotics for specific specific antibiotic treatment. Others do not. So I would consult the doctor that prescribes the antibiotic, whether or not a probiotic after the antibiotic would be a good idea.
Okay, thank you. Then Jelena asks if cooking vegetables versus eating them raw, I like this one, impacts the microbiome.
Oh, good question. Yes. Well, if you have a really good gut microbiome. For example, you've been a vegetarian for over 20 years and you're used to eating many vegetables raw. You can probably digest raw vegetables, but many of us cannot so easily. So in order to obtain the good stuff from most vegetables, it's good to briefly cook or wok or steam them. That makes the benefits easier accessible for the body. So I would say a good combination of some cooked and some raw vegetables. But I would not recommend to eat everything raw unless you're very used to that habit.
Yeah.
You really have to train your microbiome to become strong enough. And raw ingredients are usually much more difficult to digest. So cooking is actually a kind of pre-digestion that we use.
So build it up slowly. If you're not used to eating raw products, don't go overboard with heaps of salads with raw vegetables, but just include them with tiny bits and then see how it goes. Then Chantal has a really specific question. She says that she's gluten and lactose intolerant, and she has to minimize and cut out sugar completely. And she has PCOS and endometriosis. And she's curious if there are any resources to help her find a variety of recipes or food types that she could that you're allowed to eat.
I think that's a too specific question to go into detail now. I would definitely recommend consultation with an experienced dietitian.
There are, I know personally in Holland we have a good website for women who are suffering from PCOS. So maybe you can direct this question directly to me at OpenUp, so to Rose, and then it will come to me, and then I can maybe help you a bit further with this. Then we have Michael. Could we have a correlation or causation between diets like vegan, vegetarian with a healthy or unhealthy microbiome?
Yes, I definitely think that is the case, and there's also so there's usually association between diet and microbiome. We're currently in UMC Groningen conducting a study, I told you about it, Roos, where we provide healthy nutrition for 3 months to 107 patients with brain disorders, and we measure their microbiome before and after that intervention compared to a control intervention. And I hope that study will really show that there's a causal relationship between the two. I do expect it to be the case.
Yeah, that would be amazing. Sounds like nice research being done there. Then we already at the last question of today. Thanks for all the nice questions. And the last question is from Alex. So if we live in a high Western diet country, like the UK or where we are at in the Netherlands, what food will help us nurture a good microbiome? I think we already discussed it a bit. But
that's an important question. It's very good to come back to this. This is really the summary of our talk.
Exactly.
So thank you for picking this question for conclusion. So we're really too low on nutritional fiber. So we really need to increase that to things like 35 grams of fibers a day, which means many more vegetables, more calories from plants, fewer from animals, more fruit, more whole grain products. That's really the key. And try to cut down as much as possible on ultra-processed food.
Yeah, so actually the advice is quite simple. To execute it, this is usually a bit more difficult. But again, same as with the question about raw vegetables or cooked vegetables, start with implementing these steps slowly and increasing these products in your diet, and then eventually you will create a healthier microbiome. Iris, this was an amazing masterclass and talk. I think you've inspired many people with your talk today. And I would love to delve deeper, but unfortunately, we came to an end. So thank you a lot. I want to thank the listeners as well for joining the session today and for all the amazing questions that you asked. And I would also like to invite you to our upcoming masterclass on how to sustain your healthy diet on the 24th of July. And we're also hosting group sessions on nutrition and mental well-being. So it will be lovely to see you there in the future. Thanks again, Iris and the listeners for today, and enjoy the rest of your day.